was head of learning solutions and technology at Virgin Media and implementing their strategy. So, David.
Okay, what I'm going to do is take you through my presentation deck, really related to the key steps in selecting systems and suppliers. And what I want to do is really just sort of think about what are the foundations for success, especially around selecting either suppliers or systems. And from my perspective and my experience working at Virgin Media, also at RSA, rolling out global solutions, is it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of process and it's a combination of good analysis. And where you get those two things meeting, you get the right match for your organization. And the better you go through that process, the bigger the chances of success in achieving that match. And that's probably one of the most important things in terms of how you approach your selecting process. Now, what I'm going to do is sort of break this into a game of two halves. First, focus on the process, and then talk about some of the analysis that's important in terms of making a good selection. And these are almost the keys to success, so to speak. Now, the way I look at it, in terms of your process, is effectively broken down into two phases. The first is about understanding needs, and the second is about effectively a matching and evaluation exercise. And what I've looked about is thinking about how effectively the understanding the needs is really critical in guiding your way through this matching and evaluation process, because the better you understand your needs, the better you will get a match in terms of your evaluation exercise. And effectively, the understanding needs phase, going through things like strategic context, your functional needs, your IT analysis, and things like your legal environment, the legal frameworks you work within, become effectively the lens that you need to look at prospective suppliers through in order to understand whether they're the right match for you. Now, I'm going to go into this a little bit more detail through the presentation, and I effectively break down or break into each one of these different sections, really. So, understanding needs. Now, effectively, that is really based around understanding your strategic context. It's about requirements gathering. It's about understanding your business case, your budget, your success criteria. And it's also about building your functional needs, about the things that you need to be able to do now, but also in the future. But also the IT estate. What technical environment you're operating in? Is your technical strategy going to be more SaaS orientated? Is it more on-premise? What issues do you have around firewalls and all those great things? And finally, what data protection issues may you encounter in deploying a particular solution as well? What's the contracting? All this is the fundamentals of building your requirements and that's about knowing where they are today, but also about where they are for tomorrow. Now, probably the most critical phase at the start is around understanding your needs. And that's always about requirements gathering. And effectively, I always think of that also as being engagement building as well. And I suppose, my experience tends to make me think about using gathering tools through a project team to engage with the critical stakeholder groups like the legal team, the IT team, and your business functions, whether they be sales, marketing, customer experience, customer contact centers, and thinking about what do you need in order to deliver value to the business. And what you invariably tend to do is go through each of these legal IT business functions to effectively gather your stream requirements. And you try and consolidate those so you get a view about what's the balance between workplace learning and your strategic collaboration and also your formal learning. And how is that going to impact customer satisfaction? How is it going to impact your return on investment, but also the engagement of your people as well? So all these things come together in terms of that sort of requirements gathering to build the context of success. And that's all about the business cases, criteria around your engagement outcomes, your revenue outcomes, and your customer outcomes. And if you don't have that, then it's very difficult to actually understand what you're trying to bring into your organization and how it's going to deliver value. So really there's almost a barrier before you move into a matching phase of having these requirements nailed down. And only by understanding these needs can you really effectively build your requirements and scoping document, which define and almost get engagement from your business to say, this is what we're trying to do. This is the impact it's going to have, and this is why we're doing it. Okay, so what you'll try and do is effectively pull that requirements gathering information into a scoping document. This is a format that we've used recently with a telecoms client. And basically what you're trying to do is, in this instance, for authoring tools, get an understanding of what's the authoring model, which is important if you're going to go and choose an authoring tool. Also, what's the balance between external and internal development processes? And actually bringing these things together is almost a quantification of all the things that you've gone through your requirements gathering exercise. Thinking about what the selection priorities are. By bringing these out into the surface and making them common and making them known, that really helps your organization understand what they're going to get and helps you understand what you're bringing to the organization as well. If you have these hidden, then it's a bit of potluck about what's actually going to happen when you bring this into your solution. So what's really important here is thinking about a scoping document as being the trigger, effectively, for your whole matching and evaluation phase. And it enables you to transition from your understanding of what the business is to communicating coherently with external vendors and suppliers. So what you're going to do effectively in this matching and evaluation stage is all about shortlisting, requests for information, doing a demo cycle of down select, and then effectively moving into a final selection of proof of concept. So in terms of establishing a supplier shortlist, maybe the sort of starting point for this second phase of matching and evaluation, what are the sources? Where can you go to find out who you should be talking to? Now, there are a few different sources. Over in the US, you can go to the guys at Brandon Hall. You can also, if you speak to the vendors here, you'll see that they have maybe quotes from Gartner and talk about the Magic Quadrant. Some of these tools are really good. Some of them necessarily not so useful. Around Gartner, for example, he talks about the Magic Quadrant being overused, misused, and abused terribly. You can watch that on YouTube if you look him up on YouTube. And what's quite interesting is he talks much more about having a diverse, if he's going to do this again, having a much more diverse perspective. If you go to speak to any of the vendors, anybody who's in the top right-hand quadrant, being a visionary or leader, will tend to brag about it on their stand. But it's not necessarily about being a visionary or leader that's important to any organization. It's sometimes other more pragmatic things about their ability to scale to your organization. It's about their geographical presence. It's about their fit to your organization rather than trying to buy the whole shop, so to speak. You want to buy the things that are relevant specifically to you that can make a difference. What we at Elearnity also have are our own perspectives. We've taken a slightly different view from other analysts in this space. We started to think about which style ratings around core factors that will help people through their decision making, and thinking about how you can build those into a graphical display, whether it's about the functional comparison between individual solutions, or think about market profiles. What makes it more interesting to you in terms of what's really tangible as a buyer in a corporate space, and having been there for 12 years, I understand it, is about how do people compare in terms of their functionality, and how is that appropriate to you? And what we're trying to do around the star profiles is think about two factors, and these factors sort of weigh with each other when you're going through a selection process. One is the functional things that you need to be able to deliver, but also there's the organizational elements of the supplier that you're going to. How easy is their system to deliver as overall? What is the enterprise flexibility? What's the solution capability? What's the user experience of other corporates who bought from them? What's the cost like? And then on the other side, you've got these functional things, maybe from an LMS point of view, about how good is the learning portal? What's the content delivery? What's the social learning? All these other aspects. And what things aren't relevant to you, potentially. So if you're not interested in a talent management system, the fact that you haven't got a strong talent element to this particular provider is not going to be a big issue for you. But for others, it may be. And it's actually having this sort of perspective yourself around the relative functionality that is really important. And probably the advantage of using these sorts of profiles is that you can overlay several suppliers to see how much of a comparative weighting they have or comparative strengths they have. In terms of the comparative market analysis, we've sort of maybe taken some of the Gartner perspectives a little bit further in thinking about two complementary perspectives. The first is around the organizational fit. So how well does it fit to organizations in terms of its scalability and ease of delivery? Some organizations need a lot of scalability because they're geographically spread, and maybe they have tens of thousands of employees. Others maybe need less scalability because they only have a few hundred or a few thousand employees. They may not have necessarily the geographical dispersion. Other people may have very high IT resources, so they don't need to worry about the ease of delivery to enable them to make it deliverable. And also in terms of the flexibility they need from a platform, which is actually the bubble size on the left-hand side. Some people may not need too much flexibility because they're happy to go with the functionality out of the box, so to speak. That means they're less interested in customization. So unlike Gartner, it's not about being in the top right-hand quadrant. It's about being what's right for your organization from what you've taken from being your customer requirements, being your business requirements. On the other side, there's things about how much bang do you get for your buck in terms of an investment profile. So that's really comparing the capability of the solution against the cost and thinking about the usability. So in the bottom left-hand corner of this example, you've got AKA as a fictional provider who provide you with a moderate level of capability, a very low cost, but it's got a high user experience. You may have other solutions farther out. Z45 I've got over on the right-hand side is another fictitious one, which has a high cost and high capability, but that may not be relevant for your organization. So we're trying to sort of build these combination of perspectives to enable you to get a better idea about what's happening in the marketplace. And the reason why you go to Gartner, the reason why you go to Brandon Hall or to us, is to really get some market insight to build a credible shortlist. And when we talk about shortlists, what we invariably try to think about is maybe 6 to 8 vendors that you'd be interested in evaluating. And this sort of first initial evaluation phase will effectively give you that core of people that is probably credible people to engage with. And what you'll effectively do is distribute a revamped version of your scoping document through a request for information out to that shortlist. And the RFI effectively allows the suppliers to respond to your priorities and the selection criteria such as licensing, IT compatibility, legal issues, all the functionality that you require, and an implementation approach into that sort of particular box. It also maybe enables you to share with them coherently the user priorities. And then this is where the fun begins, because once you've started to get that feedback and you've got that information from different suppliers, different vendors, then you can start to go through an iterative process of down select, which really explores your needs and whittles down the list as people measure up to what you need them to be able to deliver. And what you would typically want to do is effectively start to go through a grading process where you start to build up a scoring around all the core functionality and the deliverables. And as you go through your demo and down select, as you go through user case functionality analysis, as you start to do service evaluations and take references from existing customers, you should be starting to hone in on a core supplier that you effectively want to take as being your final selection. And this is the final 2. We probably recommend you always have 2 because you never know what's going to happen through your negotiation phase. To take through as people that you want to work with as prospective suppliers. A 2-horse race sometimes also helps in terms of driving some negotiation around cost as well. But that's really probably, in a nutshell, the process that we'd probably encourage our people that we work with to go through, and something that I've used as I've gone through my work through Virgin Media and RSA in particular. And it's about this sort of 2-stage process, but to some extent, this 2-stage process is not the whole thing. It doesn't guarantee success. It is actually this final lens of analysis, as I call it, which is probably the most critical things in terms of making a really successful evaluation. And this is what I'll talk through now. And some of the analysis is really about functionality is only part of the equation. It's not just about functionality and cost, which is usually what you get into when you go through a formal procurement process with your procurement teams. There are other things to consider. There are things like the ease of delivery, the capacity for that company to innovate, the intuitiveness, attractiveness of the interface, the flexibility around the platform in terms of how it can be tailored to your particular solution and your particular requirements, its sophistication, its complexity. All those things need to find their place. And you can start to consolidate those into 3 core questions. And for me, one of the first core questions that you need to reflect about when you're buying a solution is, can you deliver? Not necessarily the vendor, but you as an internal organization. Are you able to deal with the complexity? Do you have the resources available to you to make sure this lands as you want it to? Now, every solution comes to some extent with different layers of complexity. So we've got a vertical axis on the left-hand side around the complexity of the deployment. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a simple model which effectively is showing your scalability. There's almost a dividing line. And I know if I was going to make a selection just around solution X or Y, I'd probably choose Y, because I'm a safe sort of bloke and I want to make sure that I can actually deliver this. I don't want to go for a very complex solution which I'm going to be overstretched, where it's going to take too much resource, time, money. Because in reality, money, time, and resources, in terms of people, is something that's even harder to find than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Now, you can try and build this, push this line out, this green line out, by investing more time in people and money. But invariably, it's going to be so hard to find that it's probably easier to have a simpler solution that's going to be successful than go for something that's complex and never lands. So thinking about how sustainable the solution is going to be in your environment, in your context, is really, really critical. The other thing besides thinking about whether you can deliver it is, will it actually land? So you're going to bring it and give it to somebody almost as a present. As long as you've got them exactly what they wanted, that's probably not an issue. But if you give them something that isn't what they were really after, then you're going to find that they're going to run away. So what this question is really about is, what is the match between the readiness and acceptance of your internal your internal audience and the technical match to their requirements? So we've got a simple model around this, and I think this is quite a useful one. I've very used recently with some clients to help them understand the balance between engagement, which is one of the outputs of going through a really great requirements gathering phase, and the level of functionality that you bring into organization. And to some extent, there's some really easy lenses that you can put onto what you're doing. The first is, if you're trying to bring in something that is too complex in terms of the readiness of the engagement that you have with the organization, they will easily be overwhelmed, which means they turn their back, they are evasive, they don't necessarily follow through things as you'd want them to, and you run into a cycle of having a solution that's never really bought into. On the other side, you also have things where maybe you're bringing a solution which underwhelms people because the level of functionality doesn't match their business readiness. And we see a lot of that potentially around the user interface. You bring in a new system, it's got all the functionality, and your users look at it and say, that's rubbish. And they turn their back, they move away, and actually you end up with a solution where there's almost instant dissatisfaction. There is an opportunity to be a hero, where you manage to get a high correlation between the readiness of your organization, what its requirements are, and the requirements you're actually delivering in terms of their complexity. But there's also an opportunity to crash and burn. This is probably where you're toast if you don't get this right, to be honest. Because if you bring in the wrong solution because you haven't done your requirements gathering correctly, and it's mismatched to what people's expectations are, nobody's going to want to use it. And I think one of the interesting things about this is that this evolves over time. So this time dependency isn't about how much time have I got left, whether I can include this slide. It's more about this model can change over time. It can also change by geography as well. So if you work in a very federated organization, then what you may find is that it's harder to engage with people, especially in global basis, because it's harder to find the face time, to get on the plane, to travel from place to place, to get them involved. So these axes can shift. And if you've got a more federated organization, a bit more dispersed, a bit more globally spread around the world, then you can find this vertical axis can shift up, so you've got an easier opportunity to overwhelm people, and equally, the ability to match starts to move out. So the opportunity to be a hero starts to shrink considerably depending on the model. If you work in a centralized organization like I was when I was at Virgin Media, it's much easier to succeed, because actually you can put everybody under your thumb. You have the power to do that. But in more federated organizations where you need to corral people, the actual engagement exercise of gathering requirements is really, really critical. Now, the final thing is, which is related to this point really, is around looking ahead. Will it provide long-term value and impact? And what I think about this is in terms of the complexity you bring to your solutions that you bring into your organization, there's a demand for complexity. And hopefully when you launch a solution, if you've done an okay job on your requirements, you land in this orange zone, which is effectively the functionality of the application itself. What can happen is, if you've got too much application there, you can get a ceiling of a business adoption, which means that only part of the system's being used. And what tends to happen in that environment, and probably you've heard this with people who've bought LMSs over the last 10 or 15 years, is we only use 10% of what we bought. This is a sort of classic scenario, and then people start to say, well, we're paying for too much, let's look for something different, something more suitable. Current and future requirements are. Is actually quite often organizations may potentially outgrow the solution that they've decided to buy into. This is quite common with large-scale outsource partners where you get locked into a version. It happens quite commonly where there's limited access to upgrade, maybe things are being delivered on-premise, or where you've done a lot of customization. You find it very difficult to move off that version, which means that you lose this ability to innovate. And so that drives effectively dissatisfaction because the solution can't deliver really what you want it to. And the bridging of this gap or trying to keep pace with this level of any dissatisfaction because you're expecting more from the solution, is all controlled by an organization's ability to innovate. That's the ease with which they can provide you access to the upgrades. It's the quality of their partnerships, it's their breadth of vision around the functionality, it's the platform flexibility and configurability, it's the limited use of customizations, which enables the system to keep pace with you as you change, because nothing stays the same. And that keeps you as a happy customer if they're able to keep pace. And what we see in different vendors and different markets is some are better at innovating and have a faster cycle with more functionality features on the horizon which are genuinely delivered through a comprehensive roadmap than others. So these are what I call, I suppose, the key lenses for great selections. It's thinking about what's the ease of delivery, what's the potential for success, what's the long-term value, and understanding through this lens of analysis, you can see it first time, what's really important. And no matter what tools you use, and those tools around making a good selection, using expertise that you have yourselves or buying in, or thinking about the cycle of demonstrations and ratings and evaluation, it's bringing all those things together which really makes a successful selection environment, a successful selection process. And one of the key things for us also is around independence. There's almost like a beware sign, a warning around vested interests. You'll be surprised the number of clients that we speak to who have taken advice from a particular vendor and, surprise, surprise, end up buying the solution from that vendor. It's really important to take, and I suppose this is one of my key takeaways to some extent, is don't necessarily talk to the person you're going to buy from to feel as though you're going to get the most broadest advice. I think one of the sort of maybe analogies here is that if you go to somebody who's selling hammers, then everything will start to look like a nail to them. And I think it's trying to get the whole view, the holistic view about what you're trying to deliver, which is really important. And that's my whirlwind presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that was useful, but I think it's our chance to take some questions. Yeah, sure.
Question.